What happens when the man who swore to love you forever discards you like last season's fashion? What do you do when he not only cheats, but has the audacity to text you by mistake that his new flame is an upgrade? For Cassandra Davenport, the answer wasn't tears or despair. It was a cold, calculated fury that money could fuel and revenge could satisfy. This isn't just a story about a broken heart. It's a story about a woman who was underestimated, a man who was blinded by arrogance, and a multi-million-dollar lesson in what it truly means to be upgraded. The end of Cassandra and Leo Fordham's marriage didn't come with a thunderous crash, but with the quiet, unassuming buzz of a cell phone left on a bedside table. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of brilliantly ordinary day that lulls you into a false sense of security. Sunlight smelling of freshly cut grass from the gardener's work below their penthouse apartment streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Cassandra, at 32, possessed a quiet elegance that was often mistaken for fragility. She had the kind of inherited grace that came from generations of old money, but she'd worked hard to shed the skin of a Davenport heiress to become simply Mrs. Fordham. She had wanted a real life, a real marriage built on love and mutual respect, not on the foundation of her family's formidable fortune. She managed a small independent art gallery downtown, a passion project that gave her a sense of purpose outside the towering shadow of her family's real estate empire. Leo, charming and ambitious, had been her escape. A senior analyst at a prestigious investment firm, he had the hunger and drive that she, having never needed to strive for anything, found intoxicating. He'd pursued her with a relentless, all-consuming passion that made her feel seen for herself, not for her last name. He'd promised her a world they would build together brick by brick, his ambition and her heart as the mortar. For 7 years, she believed in that promise. She hosted his work dinners, charmed his bosses, and celebrated his every promotion as if it were her own. She kept her own vast resources at a polite distance, wanting him to feel like the provider, the man of the house. She loved him, utterly foolishly, and as it turned out, blindly. That Tuesday, Leo was in the shower, the hiss of hot water, a familiar soundtrack to their mornings. His phone lying next to a half-empty glass of water buzzed again. It was a message notification. Usually she respected his privacy, but a flicker of something intuition, perhaps, or the slow, dawning poison of suspicion that had been seeping into her heart for months, made her glance at the screen. The sender was Bianca Reed. The name was unfamiliar. The message preview was damningly clear. Bianca Reed last night was insane. Can't stop thinking about you. You really are the full package. When do I get to see my man again? The air in Cassandra's lungs turned to ice. It was a physical sensation, a painful freezing of her blood that started in her chest and spread to the tips of her fingers. Her breath hitched. My man. The words echoed in the silent, sun-drenched room. She stood motionless, her hand hovering over the phone. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to walk away, to pretend she hadn't seen it. But she couldn't. With a trembling finger, she unlocked the phone. Leo, in his infinite carelessness, had never bothered to change the passcode from their anniversary date. There it was, a thread of messages stretching back months, explicit photos, lavish promises, conversations filled with a passion and excitement that had long faded from her own marriage. They talked about trips, about a future, about how much better life was without the ball and chain. But it was the message Leo had sent just last night, after a charity gala they had attended together, that broke her. Cassandra had felt beautiful that night in a sapphire gown that matched her eyes. Leo had been attentive, his hand on the small of her back. It had felt for a fleeting moment like old times. A lie. It had all been a lie. She scrolled up to his sent messages, and there it was, a message clearly intended for Bianca, that he must have accidentally sent to a group chat with his work friends before deleting it. But one of them, a man named Derek had screenshotted it and sent it back to him with a string of laughing emojis. The screenshot was what Cassandra was now staring at. Leo Fordham. Dude, you saw her? Bianca is a total upgrade. Younger, hotter, and she actually appreciates what it takes to be a winner. Cassie is classic, like a vintage car. Beautiful to look at, but you don't want it as your daily driver. Upgrade. The word slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the dismissal. The calculated cruelty. 7 years of her life, her love, her support, reduced to a vintage cum. She had intentionally parked her Rolls-Royce life to be his supportive Ford sedan, and he had the audacity to call another woman a sleeker model. The sound of the shower turning off snapped her back to reality. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, trapped bird. She placed the phone back on the nightstand exactly as it was. Her hands were surprisingly steady. The initial shock was morphing, solidifying into something cold, hard, and heavy in her gut. It felt like a block of granite settling where her heart used to be. Leo walked out of the bathroom, a towel slung low on his hips, steam billowing around him. He smiled the easy, confident smile that had once made her weak in the knees. Now it looked like a mask. "Morning, beautiful," he said, leaning in to kiss her. Cassandra turned her head slightly, so his lips brushed her cheek instead of her mouth. She felt a wave of revulsion so strong it almost made her get. "Morning," she replied, her voice a monotone she didn't recognize. "You have a message?" He glanced at the phone, then back at her, a flicker of something panic in his eyes. He snatched it up. She watched as he read the message from Bianca, his thumb moving quickly as he typed a reply. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't seem to care that she was watching. The arrogance was breathtaking. So she began, her voice dangerously quiet. "Who is Bianca Reed?" Leo didn't even flinch. He set the phone down and began to dry his hair, with another towel, his movements deliberate. "Look, Cass, I was going to talk to you about this. Were you?" The question was laced with ice. "When after you booked your next romantic getaway with your upgrade?" His head snapped up. The charming mask fell away, revealing the cold, hard man underneath. "You went through my phone. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. You left it on the nightstand." She countered, her gaze unwavering. "You called me a vintage car, Leo. Something beautiful to look at, but not what you want to drive every day." He had the decency to look momentarily ashamed, but it passed quickly, replaced by a defensive anger. "It wasn't supposed to be for you to see. It was a stupid guy talk thing. And the months of messages, the photos, the plans for a future, was that all guy talk too?" He sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. It was a gesture of performative frustration, as if she were the one being unreasonable. "This wasn't working, Cassie. Can you honestly say you've been happy? You're always content. You're placid. I need fire. I need ambition. Bianca gets that. She's hungry like me." "Hungry?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You think I don't have ambition?" "Leo, I stepped back so you could shine. I hosted your clients. I edited your reports. I put my own life on hold so you could build yours. My family could have bought and sold your entire firm 10 times over, but I wanted us. I wanted the life you promised me." "See, there it is," he exclaimed, pointing at her. "The Davenport money. It's always there, isn't it? The safety net. You've never had to really fight for anything in your life. I have. Bianca has. We're cut from the same cloth." The hypocrisy was staggering. He condemned her for the very safety net he had so comfortably enjoyed for 7 years. The penthouse, the vacations, the seamless, worry-free existence. All of it was subtly underwritten by the Davenport name, a fact he was now conveniently forgetting. "So that's it then?" she asked, her voice hollow. 7 years and you're throwing it away for a hotter model?" "It's more than that," he said, his voice softening into a condescending purr. "It's a different energy. We're just on different paths, Cass. I'm on a rocket ship and you're happy in your garden. There's no shame in that. But I can't stay in the garden with you. He was framing it as if he were doing her a favor, releasing her into a tranquil life she supposedly craved. He was rewriting their history to cast himself as the dynamic hero and her as the complacent, boring wife. Cassandra just stared at him. The man she thought she knew was gone, replaced by this cruel, self-serving stranger. The love she had felt for him curdled into something bitter and unrecognizable. "Get out," she said the words barely a whisper. "What? Get out." This time her voice was stronger, edged with steel. "Pack your things. I want you gone by the time I get back from the gallery." He actually scoffed. "Our apartment, you mean?" "Don't be dramatic. My apartment," she corrected him, a flicker of the Davenport authority returning to her. "Bought with my money from my trust, as you well know. Your name is on the lease as a resident, not a co-owner. You have 30 minutes to pack a bag. I'll have the rest of your things sent to your office. Or would you prefer I send them to Bianca Reed? I'm sure I can find her address." For the first time, real fear flashed in his eyes. The fear of losing access. The fear of his rocket ship running out of fuel, her fuel. He started to protest, to argue, but she held up a hand. "Don't, Leo. Don't say another word. Just go." He stared at her for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time, not the gentle, accommodating Cassie, but the heiress she was born to be. He saw the granite in her eyes and knew he had pushed too far. He had miscalculated. He had assumed her love was unconditional and her spine was made of jelly. He was wrong. Without another word, he turned, grabbed a duffel bag from the walk-in closet, and began throwing his designer suits and expensive watches into it, with angry, jerky movements. Cassandra walked out of the bedroom and into the vast living room. Her body began to tremble, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a deep seismic shock. She wrapped her arms around herself, sinking onto the plush white sofa. The sun was still streaming in, the day still brilliantly, cruelly ordinary. Her life, the one she had so carefully built, had been demolished in the span of 10 minutes. She laid her head back, closed her eyes, and for the first time allowed a single hot tear to trace a path down her cheek. It was a tear not of sadness, but of rage. An upgrade. He'd called his mistress an upgrade. A strange, cold clarity began to dawn in her mind. Fine. He wanted an upgrade. She would show him what a real upgrade looked like. He thought she was a vintage car. He had no idea what kind of engine she had under the hood. The Fordham chapter of her life was over. The Davenport chapter was about to begin. Later that afternoon, after Leo was gone and the silence of the penthouse was deafening, a wave of nausea washed over her. She chalked it up to stress and grief. It happened again the next morning, and the morning after that. A small, persistent thought began to nag at the back of her mind. She counted the weeks. With a dawning sense of disbelief, she realized she was late. Her hands shook as she opened the pregnancy test 2 days later. She sat on the cold marble floor of her bathroom, waiting for the 3 longest minutes of her life to pass. She didn't know what she wanted the result to be. Part of her prayed it was negative, a clean break. Another part, a deeper, more primal part, yearned for it to be true. She finally picked up the stick. 2 stark pink lines. Pregnant. She was pregnant with the child of the man who had shattered her heart and called her obsolete. All the cold fury, all the plans for revenge, suddenly felt insignificant next to this. Another wave of nausea hit her, but this time it wasn't from grief. It was morning sickness. A new life was growing inside her, a life she would have to protect. Her resolve, which had been hardening since that fateful morning, now solidified into diamond. This was no longer just about her pride. It was about her child's future. It was about ensuring that Leo Fordham, the man who saw people as assets to be traded and upgraded, would never underestimate her or her child again. Her revenge would not just be swift and satisfying. It would be generational. It would be legendary. The first phone call Cassandra made was not to her parents or her friends, but to a number she hadn't dialed in years. It was the private line of Alistair Finch, the man who had served as her father's most trusted legal counsel and consigliere for over 40 years. Mr. Finch was a relic from a different era, a man who wore three-piece suits, communicated in crisp, precise sentences, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. He had managed the Davenport family's most complex acquisitions and fiercest legal battles with a placid, almost unnerving calm. Cassandra. He said, his voice a gravelly baritone that held no surprise, as if he had been expecting her call. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Alistair?" she said, her voice steady. "I need your help. It's a corporate matter." An hour later, she was sitting in his cavernous wood-panelled office overlooking Central Park. The air smelled of old leather paper and Earl Grey tea. Mr. Finch sat opposite her, his hands steepled his pale blue eyes, watching her with unnerving perception. He had already been briefed by her father, who she'd called immediately after, but he wanted to hear it from her. She told him everything. The text message, the confrontation, the cruel, dismissive words, the pregnancy. She left out none of the humiliating details, laying her pain bare on the polished surface of his mahogany desk. She did not cry. Her voice did not waver. She spoke with the cold precision of a CEO outlining a hostile takeover. When she finished, Finch was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "And what is it you want, Cassandra?" he finally asked. "I want to bankrupt him," she said, the words tasting like acid. "I want to ruin his career. I want him to know what it feels like to be discarded." Finch nodded slowly. A scorched earth approach. Understandable, emotional, but ultimately unsatisfying and messy. Public divorces and career sabotage can backfire. They make you look vindictive, not powerful. Revenge, my dear girl, is a dish best served cold, but more importantly, it should be served on a silver platter of your own making. "What are you suggesting?" Leo Fordham's mistake was not just infidelity, Finch explained, leaning forward slightly. His cardinal sin was arrogance. He believes he is a self-made man, a winner. He has attached himself to this new woman, Bianca Reed, because she reflects this image back at him. They are living a life of performative success. Flaunting it, I presume. Cassandra nodded, thinking of the social media posts she'd forced herself to look at. Leo and Bianca, clinking champagne glasses on a rooftop bar. Bianca showing off a new diamond bracelet, captioning it, "Spoiled by my man." Their location tags were a tour of Manhattan's most exclusive hotspots. For the past week, they seemed to have taken up semi-permanent residence at one place in particular, the Grand Majestic Hotel on Fifth Avenue. It was an iconic old-world establishment known for its opulent suites and discerning clientele. It was also where Leo had proposed to her. The irony was a bitter pill. "They're staying at the Grand Majestic," she said, her voice tight. A slow smile spread across Alistair Finch's thin lips. It was a terrifying sight. "Oh, are they now? How perfect. Perfect," the Grand Majestic Finch mused, looking out the window. A fine establishment, part of the Sterling Hospitality Group, a publicly traded company. Their stock has been underperforming lately. Board is getting restless. Rumors of a shake-up. He turned his gaze back to her. Leo believes his power comes from his job, his perceived wealth. But that's not true power. Real power is ownership. It's the ability to change the rules of the game because you own the entire board. A spark ignited in Cassandra's mind. "You want me to buy Sterling Hospitality stock?" "No." Cassandra Finch said, the smile widening. "That's what Leo would do. A small, clever play. You are a Davenport. You don't play. You conquer. We are going to buy the hotel." Cassandra stared at him, stunned. "Buy the Grand Majestic. The whole hotel, precisely. Not through a public bid. That's too slow, too noisy." The Davenport Corporation, through one of its subsidiary holding companies, will make a direct private offer to the board of Sterling Hospitality. An offer so overwhelmingly generous for this one specific underperforming asset that they would be fiscally irresponsible not to accept it. It will be quiet. It will be fast. And by the time the ink is dry, you, Cassandra Davenport, will be the sole proprietor of the Grand Majestic Hotel. The sheer audacity of the plan took her breath away. It was brilliant. It was devastating. It wasn't just revenge. It was a masterclass in power. Leo was playing checkers in the hotel bar, and she was about to buy the building it was in. "He will be living in my house," she whispered, the realization dawning on her. "As your guest," Finch corrected gently. "And guests, as we know, are subject to the rules of the house." For the next 2 weeks, Cassandra threw herself into the plan with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years. This was the world she was born into, the language of leveraged buyouts and holding companies she had learned at her father's knee. It felt like coming home. She worked out of a private office at Davenport Tower, a space that had been waiting for her. She and Finch and a team of the family's most ruthless analysts worked around the clock. They dissected Sterling Hospitality's financials. They drafted the offer, structuring it to be irresistible. They used a shell corporation based in Delaware with a name so bland, Asset Management Services LLC, that it would raise no flags. Cassandra was a ghost in the machine, her name appearing nowhere on the initial paperwork. While she was building an empire, Leo was building a fantasy. His social media was a curated highlight reel of his new life. Photos of him and Bianca at the hotel's exclusive rooftop pool, videos of them dining at Le Ciel, the hotel's Michelin-starred restaurant. Bianca's Instagram was a deluge of designer shopping bags, all artfully arranged on the bed of their suite. Suite 1201, the Imperial Suite. The same suite where Leo had once scattered rose petals and asked Cassandra to be his wife. He was actively, publicly desecrating their shared memories, replacing them with a shinier, newer version. Each post was a small, sharp stab to Cassandra's heart, but with each stab, the granite inside her grew harder, her resolve more absolute. She saw the life he was projecting, the Patek Philippe on his wrist, the Hermes bag on Bianca's arm. He was spending lavishly, desperately, trying to project an image of a man who had made it on his own terms. Cassandra knew better. He was burning through his savings and maxing out his credit cards. His salary was substantial, but it couldn't sustain that level of performative wealth for long. He was on a rocket ship, all right, one that was about to run out of fuel and come crashing back to Earth. The day the deal closed, Cassandra was in Finch's office again. The final wire transfer, a sum with enough zeros to make her head spin, had been sent. A courier delivered a thick portfolio of documents. Finch slid the top one across the desk to her. It was the deed. There, in crisp black ink, was the name of the new owner of the Grand Majestic Hotel Asset Management Services, LLC. And on the signatory page for the LC, there was only one name, Cassandra Davenport. She ran her fingers over her own signature. A tremor of pure, unadulterated power coursed through her. She looked out the window down at the sprawling city below. She was 3 months pregnant, her body just beginning to change. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "Phase 1 is complete," Finch said, pouring them both glasses of sparkling water. "What's your first move as the new proprietor?" Ms. Davenport Cassandra took a sip of water, the bubbles fizzing on her tongue. She thought of Leo and Bianca, likely lounging by the pool in her hotel at this very moment, blissfully unaware that the ground had just shifted beneath their feet. "My first move, Alistair," she said, a predatory smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks, "is a personal inspection. I think it's time for the new owner to meet the staff. And then, I think it's time we made some adjustments to the guest experience." The Grand Majestic Hotel was a symphony of hushed opulence. Its lobby was a grand, cavernous space with floors of polished Italian marble, soaring columns, and a magnificent crystal chandelier that dripped light like frozen diamonds. The air was perfumed with the scent of fresh lilies, their fragrance mingling with the faint, expensive smell of leather and old money. Cassandra walked in, not as a guest, but as a conqueror. She wore a tailored navy blue dress that was professional and severe, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. She was flanked by Alistair Finch and two senior executives from the Davenport Corporation. Her presence commanded attention. The concierge, a man named Jean-Pierre, who had been at the hotel for 30 years, straightened his posture instinctively. "May I help you, madam?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm here to see the general manager, Mr. Harrison," Cassandra said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Tell him Cassandra Davenport is here." The name Davenport worked like a master key. Doors opened, people scurried. Within minutes, they were being escorted to the top floor to the lavish executive offices. Robert Harrison was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed with a permanently worried expression that came from decades of catering to the whims of the ultra-rich. He greeted them with a professional smile, but his eyes darted nervously between Cassandra and Finch. He had been told that morning in a terse, legally binding email that the hotel had been sold and the new owner would be arriving for an inspection. He had expected a corporate delegation, not a young woman whose family name was synonymous with New York real estate royalty. Ms. Davenport, Mr. Finch. An unexpected honor. Harrison began gesturing to the chairs in his office. "Welcome to the Grand Majestic. We were only just informed of the transition." "The transition is effective immediately," Robert Finch said, taking the lead. "Ms. Davenport is the sole proprietor. All operational command now flows directly from her." Harrison's eyes widened slightly. "Of course. I and my staff are entirely at your disposal. Ms. Davenport, what is your vision for the hotel? Are there any immediate changes you wish to implement?" Cassandra leaned forward, her hands clasped on the polished desk. "My vision is for excellence, Mr. Harrison. Unparalleled service. Absolute discretion. And I believe the best way to ensure that standard is to understand the details of the operation myself. Starting with our current guest list." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "I believe we have a Mr. Leo Fordham and a Ms. Bianca Reed staying in the Imperial Suite, 1201. Is that correct?" Harrison consulted his computer. "Yes, that's correct. Mr. Fordham is a long-term guest, booked for the next month." "Excellent," Cassandra said, a chill in her voice. "I want to begin by making their stay unforgettable. But first, a few new house rules. Effective immediately, my authority overrides all existing reservations and guest preferences. My instructions are to be followed to the letter without question and with the utmost discretion. No one is to know the hotel has a new owner until I decide to announce it. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Ms. Davenport," Harrison said, already sensing the tectonic shift in power. "Good," Cassandra replied. "Now regarding Mr. Fordham and Ms. Reed, I believe they have a dinner reservation at Le Ciel tonight at 8 p.m. "Yes, their usual table by the window." "Cancel it," Cassandra said simply. "Tell them there was a booking error." "The restaurant is completely full. Find them the worst table in the hotel's secondary bistro instead. Near the kitchen doors, perhaps." Harrison blinked. "Ms. Davenport, Mr. Fordham is a very vocal guest." "I'm counting on it," she said. "Also, I noticed they have a couple's massage scheduled at the spa tomorrow morning." "Yes, the VIP suite." "A pipe has burst in the spa's VP suite," Cassandra said, her face a mask of stone. "A terrible shame. All appointments there are cancelled for the foreseeable future. I'm sure they can squeeze into the public sauna." One by one, she began to dismantle their perfect, curated world. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. That evening, Leo and Bianca descended from their suite, dressed for a grand dinner. Bianca was in a glittering backless gold dress, her phone already in hand, ready to document their fabulous meal. Leo, exuding confidence, strode up to the hostess at Le Ciel. "Fordham party of two," he announced. The hostess, a young woman who had been thoroughly briefed by Mr. Harrison, gave him a polite, apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry, sir, but I don't seem to have a reservation under that name." "That's impossible," Leo scoffed. "I have a standing reservation. We were here 2 nights ago." "Check again." "I have checked, sir. There seems to have been a system glitch. We are completely booked for a private event this evening." Leo's face began to flush with anger. "This is unacceptable. Get me the manager." The manager appeared, repeated the same story with practiced regret, and offered them a complimentary table at the Garden Cafe downstairs as a gesture of goodwill. Defeated and fuming, Leo had no choice but to accept. They were led to a small, cramped table wedged between a service station and the swinging doors of the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans providing the soundtrack to their meal. Bianca's face was a thundercloud. There would be no Instagram post tonight. The next morning, their spa appointment was cancelled due to the mysterious burst pipe. The super-fast premium Wi-Fi in their suite suddenly slowed to a crawl, making it impossible for Bianca to upload her stories or for Leo to conduct his video calls for work. When he called the front desk to complain, he was met with a maddeningly cheerful but utterly unhelpful response. "We're experiencing network-wide issues, sir. Our technicians are working on it. We appreciate your patience." The small inconveniences began to mount. The room service orders were consistently wrong. A steak ordered medium rare arrived well done. A bottle of expensive champagne was inexplicably replaced with Prosecco. Their laundry was returned a day late. Each incident was small enough to be plausible deniability, a simple mistake, but together they formed a pattern of frustrating, targeted incompetence. Leo's famous charm began to fray. He was constantly on the phone with the front desk, his voice growing louder and more belligerent with each call. He saw it as a personal slight from an incompetent staff, a failure to recognize his importance. Bianca, whose entire existence was predicated on a seamless, luxurious aesthetic, was becoming increasingly agitated. "This place has gone to the dogs." "Leo," she complained, staring at her phone as it struggled to buffer a video. "For what you're paying, this is a joke. Can't you do something? I'm trying." He'd snapped back, his own stress mounting. He had an important presentation coming up and was counting on the hotel's prestige and services to woo a potential client. The following week, Cassandra escalated her campaign. Leo and Bianca returned from a shopping spree on Fifth Avenue, their arms laden with bags from Gucci and Prada. As Leo went to pay for their taxi with the hotel's house account, the doorman stopped him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Fordham," the doorman said, his face impassive. "The front desk has informed us that your house charging privileges have been temporarily suspended pending a credit review." Leo froze. "Oh, what? That's ridiculous. My card is on file. You'll have to speak with the front desk, sir." In the middle of the grand lobby, in front of a dozen other guests, Leo was forced to have a hushed, intense argument with the desk clerk. The clerk, a young man named Thomas, who had been personally promoted by Cassandra that morning, was polite but firm. "There appears to be an issue with the pre-authorization on your American Express, sir. It has been declined." "Declined?" Leo hissed, his face turning a blotchy red. "There is $500,000 of credit on that card. Run it again." "I have, sir. 3 times. It's declined." "Perhaps you could try another card." The public humiliation was exquisite. Bianca watched her arms crossed, her perfectly manicured foot tapping impatiently. This was not the picture of the powerful, in-control man she had signed up for. Fumbling for his wallet, Leo pulled out another card, which was grudgingly accepted. But the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted in Bianca's mind. Cassandra watched the whole scene from a security monitor in her new office, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Beside her, Mr. Harrison stood looking pale. He is going to have a full-blown meltdown, Miss Davenport. I certainly hope so, Robert Cassandra replied, taking a sip of her chamomile tea. Phase 2 is about to begin. I believe Mr. Fordham has booked the main ballroom for a client presentation and cocktail party. Next Friday, yes. A very important event for him, I understand. He's trying to land the Oakhaven account. Excellent, she said. Make sure everything is perfect for his event. The best food, the best champagne extra staff. Spare no expense. Let him believe he is finally getting the service he deserves. Harrison looked confused. You want us to help him? I want him to feel confident. Cassandra clarified, her eyes gleaming with a cold fire. I want him to feel like he is on top of the world, because the higher he climbs, the more devastating the fall will be. On Friday night, Robert I will be attending the party, and I will be introducing myself to his guest of honor. And then, I'm going to have him evicted. The Grand Majestic's sovereign ballroom was not merely a room, it was a testament to enduring power. Tonight it had been molded to reflect the aspirations of one man, Leo Fordham. The vast space was bathed in a golden buttery light from 3 colossal chandeliers, their thousands of crystals refracting the glow onto the faces of Manhattan's financial elite. The air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the hotel's signature white lilies buzzed with the low hum of influential conversations. A string quartet, nestled in a velvet-draped alcove, played Vivaldi with a subdued elegance that served as the perfect sophisticated backdrop for the clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of multi-million-dollar deals. At the gravitational center of this universe stood Leo. He was more than a host. He was a sun king in his court. Dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, he radiated an aura of pure, unadulterated triumph. Everything, after a week of inexplicable frustrations, had fallen perfectly into place. The hotel staff, once seemingly incompetent, now moved with a balletic grace, anticipating every need. His presentation to the Oakhaven Capital executives that afternoon had been a masterstroke of confidence and charisma. Now, all that remained was to seal the deal amidst this stunning display of his own success. He placed a proprietary hand on the small of Bianca Reed's back. She was his ultimate accessory, a living work of art in a crimson gown that seemed poured onto her flawless figure. She played her part to perfection, her laughter bright and melodious, her head tilted just so, looking at him with an adoration that fueled his already incandescent ego. For Bianca, this night was the ultimate validation. The brief, unpleasant turbulence of declined credit cards and faulty room service had been forgotten. This, the glamour, the power, the envy in the eyes of other women, was the reality she had invested in. This was Leo, the winner, proving his worth. Incredible event, Fordham rumbled Mr. Peterson, the CEO of Oakhaven Capital. He was a man built like a bulldog with shrewd eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless ambitious young men. You certainly know how to make an impression. This hotel, it's a statement in itself. Leo's smile was wide and genuine. Only the best for Oakhaven, sir. He said, his voice smooth as the aged Scotch in Peterson's glass. I consider the Grand Majestic my home away from home. The service is unparalleled. You just have to know how to command it. He felt a surge of satisfaction at that last line. He had commanded it, and the hotel had bent to his will. He was the master of this domain. He allowed his gaze to sweep across the room, a conqueror surveying his territory. He thought, for a fleeting, triumphant moment, of Cassandra. He pictured her in their old apartment, her apartment, now probably curled up with a book, living her quiet beige life. He felt a brief, condescending flicker of pity. She couldn't understand this world, this thrill. She was the safe harbor, and he was the battleship destined for glorious combat on the open sea. He had made the right choice. Bianca was his future. This party was his coronation. He felt utterly, completely invincible. It was then that the atmosphere in the ballroom began to shift. It wasn't a sudden change, but a slow, subtle alteration in the ambient energy, like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. It started near the grand double doors at the entrance. Conversations closest to the entryway faltered for a beat. Heads turned. A ripple of whispers began to spread inward, moving through the crowd like a silent current. Into the golden light stepped Cassandra Davenport. She was a vision in black. Where Bianca was a fiery, attention-seeking spectacle, Cassandra was a cool, dark void of elegance that drew all light into it. Her gown was deceptively simple, a column of midnight silk that fell to the floor without embellishment. Her only jewelry was a river of diamonds around her neck, a piece so magnificent it silenced all other attempts at adornment in the room. Her hair was swept back, revealing the clean, proud lines of her face, and her expression was one of serene, unnerving calm. She wasn't entering a party, she was taking possession of a space. She was flanked by Alistair Finch, his silver hair and stoic presence, lending her an additional layer of gravitas. They didn't rush. They paused for a moment, their eyes scanning the room, two predators identifying their prey. Leo saw her. The champagne flute in his hand felt suddenly slick with sweat. His heart gave a painful lurch, a violent, sickening thud against his ribs. It was like seeing a ghost, but a ghost more vibrant and alive than anyone else in the room. What was she doing here? His mind raced, scrambling for an explanation. Was she trying to make a scene? Beg him to come back? The arrogance was so ingrained that even in his shock, he assumed her presence must revolve around him. But she wasn't looking at him. Her gaze swept past him as if he were part of the furniture. Her target was clear. With a calm, deliberate pace, she began to move through the room, a path parting before her, as guests, recognizing the Davenport name and the power it represented, stepped aside. She was heading directly for Mr. Peterson. Peterson, a contemporary of her father's, watched her approach, his gruff expression softening into one of genuine warmth and surprise. He'd known Cassie since she was a girl, attending these functions on her father's arm. "Cassie, my dear girl." What a pleasant surprise, he boomed, his voice cutting through the nervous quiet. He took her hand, patting it warmly. "I haven't seen you since that fundraiser in the Hamptons. You look wonderful. Your father must be very proud." "Miss Peterson, it's lovely to see you," Cassandra said. Her voice was perfectly modulated, carrying easily across the space without her having to raise it. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I hope you're enjoying the evening. I trust my staff is taking good care of you." The question landed. Peterson's bushy eyebrows shot up. He looked from Cassandra's placid face to the impeccable waiters and back again. The proprietary tone was unmistakable. "Your staff?" He asked the single word, dripping with curiosity and dawning realization. Leo felt the blood drain from his face. He finally moved, stumbling forward, as if breaking free from a trance, his carefully constructed composure shattering. "Cassie, what is this? What are you doing here?" Only then did she finally turn her gaze on him. It was not the look of a scorned woman, not angry, not hurt, not vengeful. It was worse. It was the detached, clinical look a scientist might give a specimen under a microscope. It was a look of such profound, chilling indifference that it stripped him bare. "Leo," she said, her voice cool and even. "I should have known I'd find you here." She then turned back to Peterson, offering him a serene smile. "To answer your question, yes. Welcome to my hotel. I apologize for not greeting you sooner, but I wanted to ensure everything was running smoothly for my guests." The word guests was a perfectly aimed dart, and it hit its mark. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The string quartet had faltered into silence. Peterson's mind, sharp and accustomed to ruthless corporate plays, put the pieces together in an instant. He looked from the powerful, poised woman in front of him to the sputtering, panicked man beside him. You, you bought the Grand Majestic? Peterson asked Cassandra, a new and profound respect dawning in his eyes. This wasn't just the Davenport heiress. This was a shark in her own right. It was a recent acquisition, Cassandra replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. A passion project. I've always adored this building's potential. The implication was clear. The hotel, under its previous management, had been underperforming, just like everything else Leo touched. But since you're here, Leo, she continued, turning her full attention back to him, the pleasantries over, there are a few matters of housekeeping we need to discuss. She gave a subtle nod, and Mr. Harrison, the general manager, materialized at her side, his face a grim professional mask. He held a thick, leather-bound portfolio. Robert, would you please bring me Mr. Fordham's bill? The public nature of the request was a stunning act of aggression delivered with the politeness of a business inquiry. A wave of shocked murmurs and frantic whispers swept the room. Cell phones were being subtly angled to record the unfolding drama. Cassandra took the portfolio from Harrison and opened it. She didn't rush. She let the silence stretch, forcing every person in the room to focus on the humiliation she was about to administer. Let's see. She mused, her fingertip tracing a line down the first page. The Imperial Suite, number 1201. My favorite. Booked for 3 weeks. An extensive room service ledger. Multiple orders of caviar lobster, Cristal champagne. A man of expensive tastes. She paused. Also charges for the business center, premium international calls, and a significant valet bill. And of course, tonight's event. She flipped a page, her expression unchanging. The sovereign ballroom rental, the catering for 100 guests, the floral arrangements, the string quartet, the open bar featuring what I'm told is a top-shelf selection. She looked up, her gaze piercing Leo's. It's all quite substantial. Leo was frozen, a statue of impotent rage and terror. Bianca, who had been clinging to his arm like a life raft, slowly let go. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions, confusion giving way to a dawning, sickening comprehension. The American Express you have on file was, as you know, declined earlier this week. Cassandra continued, her voice as calm as if she were reading a weather report. The visa you provided as a backup is currently over its limit by... She paused, tilting the page to the light for effect. A rather shocking amount. I'm afraid, Leo, that you have an outstanding balance that you are in no position to pay. She finally closed the portfolio with a soft, final snap. There is no misunderstanding. You have been enjoying my hospitality on credit that you do not have. You have been running a scam in my hotel. The accusation delivered so calmly was devastating. She turned her gaze to Bianca, and for a moment the ice in her eyes thawed into something resembling pity. And you, Miss Reed, she said softly, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. He brought you into this. He made you promises based on a life he couldn't afford, financed by the woman he discarded. Cassandra's eyes flicked back to Leo, locking him in place. He told me you were an upgrade, but it seems he was the one in need of an upgrade when he tried to get on my tab. That was the kill shot. Bianca's face went blank with shock, then hardened into a mask of cold fury. The Hermes bag, the crimson dress, the illusion of being the chosen one. It all evaporated, revealing the cheap, hollow reality underneath. She wasn't a prize. She was collateral damage in a pathetic con. She looked at Leo, not with heartbreak, but with the utter contempt one reserves for a bad investment. Leo, she whispered the single word, an indictment. When he could only stare dumbstruck, she made her decision. With a composure that mirrored Cassandra's, Bianca turned on her heel and walked away, her head held high. She didn't run. She simply exited the scene, cutting her losses, disappearing into the crowd without a backward glance. The last of Leo's support structure had crumbled. He was alone, exposed under the glare of 100 pairs of eyes. Cassandra gave another almost imperceptible nod. Robert, she said, her voice ringing with the clear, cold authority of ownership. "Please have security escort Mr. Fordham to his suite. They will allow him 1 hour to pack his personal belongings, have the luggage held at the bell desk until the bill is settled in full, and then have them escort him off my property." She took a step closer to Leo, close enough that only he could hear her next words. "Your stay at the Grand Majestic is over," she whispered, before raising her voice to a steely, resonant tone that echoed through the silent ballroom. "Checkout time is now." Two uniformed security guards who had been waiting discreetly by the doors moved forward. They were large men, but they moved with a quiet professionalism that was far more intimidating than any overt aggression. They flanked Leo, their presence a silent, immovable verdict. Mr. Peterson watched the scene with a grim fascination, then turned to Cassandra with a slow, deliberate nod of respect. The Oakhaven deal was not just dead, it was a cautionary tale he'd be telling for years. As the guards gently but firmly began to lead him away, Leo's composure finally shattered completely. He looked at Cassandra, his face a desperate plea. All the arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw terror of a man who had lost everything in a single, perfectly executed maneuver. Cassandra met his gaze. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She simply held his eyes, letting him see the full, devastating scope of his miscalculation. Then slowly, she placed a protective hand over her still flat abdomen, a silent, secret acknowledgement of the real reason for her fight, the future she was protecting. It was the final move in a game of chess he never even knew he was playing. Then she turned her back on him. She turned back to Mr. Peterson, back to the party, back to her world. The gesture was absolute. She was dismissing him, not just from the ballroom, but from her life. The string quartet, taking their cue from Mr. Harrison, hesitantly began to play again. The spell was broken. The party, her party, would continue, and Leo Fordham was already a ghost. In the end, it was never just about the hotel. It was about reclaiming a narrative. Cassandra Davenport showed the world, and more importantly herself, that her value was not determined by a man's approval. She transformed her deepest heartbreak into her greatest power move, not with screaming or tears, but with the silent, deadly precision of a balance sheet and a deed. She proved that the ultimate upgrade isn't a new partner, it's a new version of yourself, one that is unapologetically powerful, fiercely independent, and in complete control of her own story. Her son would be born, not into a story of betrayal, but into the legacy of a mother who built an empire from the rubble of a broken heart. What did you think of Cassandra's epic revenge? Could you ever go to such lengths? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
In the ruthless world of New York's elite, a public humiliation is a spectator sport. Richard Sterling thought he'd won the final round against his ex-wife, Catherine. He had the money, the power, and the dazzling new fiancée. He thought he'd left Catherine with nothing. But what happens when the woman you tried to erase doesn't cry? What if she just smiles, turns her back, and walks up the steps of a private jet that makes yours look like a toy? This is a story of how the quietest exit becomes the loudest statement of all. Stick around, the revenge is just getting started. The air in the Sotheby's auction room on York Avenue was thick with the scent of old money and new ambition. It was a suffocating blend that Catherine Hayes had once found intoxicating. Now, it just smelled of decay. She sat alone in the 10th row, a ghost in a simple, elegant navy blue dress, a stark contrast to the glittering peacocks preening around her. Her presence was a quiet rebellion. For 5 years, she had been Mrs. Richard Sterling, a name that opened every door in this city. Now she was just Catherine Hayes, and the only door she was interested in was the one marked Exit. Across the room, Richard was holding court. He wasn't just present, he was performing. His voice a booming baritone, she once found comforting now grated on her nerves. He was flanked by his new fiancée, Isabella Rossi, a woman who looked like she had been sculpted from marble and draped in diamonds. Isabella was 26, a decade younger than Catherine, with the kind of effortless beauty that demanded attention. On her finger, a diamond the size of a small quail's egg caught the light, shooting out blinding white daggers. Richard made sure everyone saw it, his hand, protectively possessively on Isabella's, turning it this way and that as he greeted acquaintances. He was a master of the subtle boast, the casual display of overwhelming wealth. Catherine focused on the catalogue in her lap. Lot 37, a collection of rare handwritten letters from Virginia Woolf to Vita Sackville West. They were intimate, raw, and beautiful, a conversation across time between two brilliant women. They had been her holy grail for years. During their marriage, Richard had scoffed at her dusty old papers, preferring to invest in art that screamed its value from the wall. He couldn't understand the quiet thrill of holding history in her hands. The bidding for the letters began. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't about Richard. This was for her. She raised her paddle. The numbers climbed, fast and furious. It was a duel between her and a man in the front row with a slicked-back ponytail. Finally, the ponytail man shook his head. The auctioneer's gaze fell on Catherine. "Sold," he was about to say, when a new voice, loud and clear, from the back of the room, cut through the tension. 200,000. Every head turned. It was Richard. He hadn't even been paying attention. He was looking directly at Catherine, a cruel, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. Isabella giggled, a tinkling, artificial sound. Catherine's blood ran cold. He was doing this purely to spite her. He knew what these letters meant to her. It was a power play, a public humiliation. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and raised her paddle again. 225,000. Richard laughed, a short, sharp bark. 300,000. The room was silent now, all pretense of polite chatter gone. It was a spectator sport, the ex-wife versus the new fiancé's champion. Catherine's savings could cover this, but it would be a stretch. This was no longer about the letters. It was about drawing a line in the sand. 350,000, she said, her voice betraying a slight tremble. Richard's smirk widened. He didn't even say the number. He just nodded to the auctioneer. The auctioneer, a man named David Abernathy, who had known them both for years, looked uncomfortable. 400,000 to Mr. Sterling. Catherine looked at Richard. He was a predator, toying with his prey. He was enjoying this. He wanted to see her break. He wanted her to retreat defeated. But as she met his gaze, she didn't feel defeated. She felt a strange sense of liberation. He could have the letters. He could have the victory. He was buying pieces of paper. She was buying her freedom. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head to the auctioneer. "Sold?" Abernathy's gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed the breaking of the final invisible chain that had tied her to Richard Sterling. To Mr. Richard Sterling. A polite, scattered applause broke out. Richard leaned over and kissed Isabella, a long, theatrical kiss for the benefit of the audience. Catherine stood up. She didn't look at them. She turned and walked out of the auction room, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't see the confused look on Richard's face as he watched her go. He had expected tears, a scene, a storming out. He had not expected this quiet, dignified retreat. He had won the battle, but as Catherine disappeared into the New York City crowds, he had the unsettling feeling that he had just lost the war. He held up his prize, the letters he didn't want, and for the first time felt the hollowness of his victory. The ghost had left the building, but her spectre remained a question mark hanging in the expensive air. 2 days later, the sky over Teterboro, New Jersey, was a brilliant cloudless blue. It was the kind of day that made the private jets lined up on the tarmac gleam like jewels. Catherine Hayes stood by the entrance to the signature flight support terminal, a single well-worn leather suitcase at her feet. She was dressed for travel in a simple cream-colored cashmere sweater and black trousers. She was flying to London for a book fair, a trip she had planned months ago, a celebration of her new, unencumbered life. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom purred to a stop a few feet away. The driver, a man in a crisp uniform, hurried to open the rear passenger door. Out stepped Richard Sterling, followed by Isabella, who was swathed in a fur coat that was utterly inappropriate for the mild autumn day. Richard's eyes scanned the area and landed on Catherine. He feigned surprise, a poorly acted charade that was almost insulting. "Catherine, what a coincidence!" he boomed, striding towards her. Isabella clinging to his arm. "Richard," Catherine said, her tone flat neutral. She didn't have the energy for his games today. "Off somewhere?" he asked, his gaze flicking to her single suitcase, a silent judgment on her modest luggage compared to the mountain of Louis Vuitton trunks being unloaded from his rolls. "London," she replied simply. "Ah, London. Business, I assume. Still playing with those dusty old books." He gestured vaguely, a dismissive wave of his hand. Before Catherine could answer, he pulled Isabella forward. "Darling, you remember my ex-wife, Catherine?" "Catherine, this is my fiancée, Isabella Rossi." "Of course," Isabella said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. She extended her left hand, not for a handshake, but to display the ring. The diamond, a flawless cushion-cut behemoth, was impossible to ignore. It was a weapon designed to blind and intimidate. "Richard has told me so much about you." "I'm sure he has," Catherine said, her eyes meeting Isabella's. She didn't look at the ring. This deliberate lack of acknowledgement was a small act of defiance, but it was hers. Richard, annoyed that his trump card was being ignored, pressed on. "We're off to St. Bart's for a few weeks, a little pre-wedding getaway, you know how it is. The stress of planning the wedding of the century, why, it takes its toll." He sighed, a theatrical display of the burdens of the ultra-wealthy. "Our jet is just being prepared." He pointed towards a large but slightly dated Bombardier Global Express. "Your flying commercial, I take it, must be trying." The condescension was so thick, Catherine could have choked on it. She thought of the years she had endured this, the constant subtle digs, the psychological warfare designed to make her feel small, inadequate. She had absorbed it all, letting it chip away at her sense of self. But no more. "Something like that," she said, a faint, enigmatic smile touching her lips. Just then, a low hum grew into a powerful roar. An aircraft impossibly sleek and futuristic was taxiing towards their terminal. It was a Gulfstream G800, the latest and largest purpose-built private aircraft in the world. Its pearl-white fuselage shimmered in the sunlight, its wingtips raked back like a bird of prey. It made Richard's Bombardier look like a relic. The jet came to a graceful stop directly in front of them. The door opened, and a staircase descended with a silent hydraulic hiss. A flight attendant, in a sharp, tailored uniform, appeared at the top of the stairs. "Ms. Hayes, we are ready for you." Catherine picked up her suitcase. She turned to Richard and Isabella. Their mouths were slightly agape, their eyes wide with disbelief. The triumphant smirk had vanished from Richard's face, replaced by a look of utter slack-jawed confusion. Isabella's grip on his arm had tightened, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit. "It was interesting seeing you both," Catherine said. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable note of finality in it. "Have a wonderful time in St. Bart's." She walked towards the jet, her steps unhurried, her posture perfect. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel Richard's stunned gaze on her back, a silent testament to the seismic shift that had just occurred. As she ascended the stairs and disappeared into the cool, quiet interior of the G800, the door sealing shut behind her, Richard Sterling was left standing on the tarmac, the gaudy diamond on his fiancée's hand, suddenly looking small and insignificant under the shadow of the magnificent aircraft that had just swallowed his ex-wife whole. The ghost of his past had not only returned, she had upgraded, and he had no idea who he was up against. The interior of the Gulfstream G800 was a sanctuary of understated luxury. There was no gold-plated tackiness, no ostentatious displays of wealth that Richard would have insisted upon. Instead, the cabin was a symphony of soft grays, cream-colored leather, and dark polished wood. It was spacious, quiet, and calming. As Catherine settled into a plush armchair, a sense of peace washed over her, a feeling she hadn't realized she had been missing for years. A man emerged from the forward cabin, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He was tall, with a lean, athletic build that his impeccably tailored suit couldn't conceal. His hair was dark, with distinguished flecks of silver at the temples, and his eyes, a startlingly intelligent shade of blue, crinkled at the corners as he smiled at her. This was Julian Croft. "I saw that little drama on the tarmac," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "I almost sent the co-pilot out with a bucket of popcorn." He handed her a glass of water. "Are you all right?" "I'm better than all right," Catherine said, taking a sip. "I think I just shed the last 10 pounds of a very toxic marriage." Julian laughed, a genuine warm sound that filled the cabin. He took the seat opposite her. "Richard Sterling, I had my team do a little digging after you first mentioned him. A classic narcissist. All flash, no substance. His entire self-worth is tied to the perception of others. Men like that are incredibly fragile." "You have no idea," Catherine murmured, looking out the window as the jet began its powerful, smooth ascent. The world and her past shrank beneath them. She had met Julian Croft 6 months ago at a small independent bookstore in Greenwich Village. She had been reaching for a first edition of Mrs. Dalloway, and so had he. They had struck up a conversation, a real conversation, about books, art, and the quiet joys of a life lived outside the spotlight. He had introduced himself as Julian, a consultant. It was only weeks later, after a series of long dinners and walks through Central Park, that she discovered consultant was a massive understatement. Julian Croft was the founder and CEO of a global technology firm that specialized in data security and artificial intelligence. He was a billionaire, but he wore his wealth like a comfortable, well-worn coat, not a suit of armor like Richard. He was fiercely private, rarely photographed, and his name was more likely to be found in the footnotes of academic journals than in the gossip columns. He was flaunting his fiancée's ring, Catherine said, a small, wry smile on her face. It was the size of a doorknob. "And you," Julian said, his blue eyes twinkling, "countered with a G800. A rather effective checkmate, I thought." "It wasn't my intention," she said, though she couldn't deny the small, wicked thrill she had felt. "But I'm not going to pretend it wasn't satisfying." "Good," Julian said. You've spent too long diminishing yourself to make a small man feel big. That chapter is over." He reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm, firm, and reassuring. "How are the Virginia Woolf letters?" Catherine's heart sank a little. "He bought them. Outbid me at the Sotheby's auction. It was a deliberate act of cruelty." Julian was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I see." He took a sip of his drink. "Well, perhaps it's for the best. Sometimes you have to let go of old things to make room for the new." He changed the subject, steering the conversation towards the London Book Fair, asking her about the dealers she was excited to meet, the lectures she planned to attend. He listened, truly listened, his attention focused entirely on her. It was this more than the private jet or the limitless resources at his disposal that was the true measure of the man. He saw her, the real her, the woman who loved dusty old books and quiet afternoons. With Richard, she had been an accessory, a beautiful object to be displayed. With Julian, she was a partner. As they flew east, chasing the sun, Catherine felt a profound sense of rightness. The turbulence of her past was finally smoothing out into clear, open skies. She was no longer a ghost at someone else's feast. She was the guest of honor at her own. She leaned her head back against the soft leather, the hum of the powerful engines, a lullaby of her new life. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt completely and utterly safe. The man in the jet was not just her billionaire boyfriend. He was her safe harbor, the quiet, steady anchor in the storm she had just escaped. And together, they were flying towards a future she was finally excited to embrace. Richard Sterling stood on the tarmac at Teterboro, long after the Gulfstream G800 had become a silver speck in the vast blue sky. The roar of its engines had been replaced by a ringing in his ears. The triumphant high from the auction, the smug satisfaction of flaunting his wealth, had evaporated, leaving a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. "Richard, darling, are we going?" Isabella's voice, usually a melodic purr, was sharp, impatient. The pre-wedding glow had been replaced by a pout. Her perfect St. Bart's vacation was being delayed. "What was that?" Richard muttered, not to her but to himself. "Whose jet was that?" "How should I know?" Isabella snapped, pulling her ridiculous fur coat tighter around her. "Does it matter? It's probably a rental. She's probably shacking up with some vulgar new money type to pay her bills." But Richard knew it wasn't a rental. He had seen the discreet custom logo on the tail fin, a stylized C intertwined with a J. That was a private insignia. That was ownership. And the G800, he knew what those cost. The base model was nearly $80 million. With custom interiors, you were pushing $100 million. That wasn't new money. That was a different stratosphere of wealth, a level that made his own considerable fortune feel pedestrian. The flight to St. Bart's was tense. Richard was silent, staring out the window, replaying the scene at the airfield over and over in his mind. Catherine's calm, her enigmatic smile, her complete and utter lack of intimidation. It was as if she was a different person. The quiet, accommodating woman he had divorced, the woman he had so easily crushed at the auction, was gone. In her place was this cool, confident stranger who boarded $100 million jets as if she were hailing a taxi. As soon as they landed and checked into their beachfront villa at the Eden Rock, Richard was on the phone. He called his PI, a former NYPD detective named Sal Moretti. "Sal, I need you to find something out for me," Richard said, pacing the marble floors of the villa. "A Gulfstream G800 tail number. I didn't get it, but it had a custom logo on the tail, a J and a C intertwined. A G800. That's a big bird, Richard. Not many of those around, Sal said. What's this about? My ex-wife was on it. Richard said the words, tasting like ash. Catherine, I thought she was, well, you know. Yeah, well, apparently not, Richard grumbled. Find out who owns it, and find out who she was with. I want a name, Sal. I want to know everything. The wait was agonizing. Richard tried to play the part of the doting fiancé, taking Isabella to designer boutiques in Gustavia and to dinner at Benito, but his heart wasn't in it. His mind was elsewhere, consumed by the mystery of Catherine and her new life. Isabella, sensing his distraction, grew increasingly petulant. "Richard, are you even listening to me?" she complained over a plate of ridiculously expensive lobster. "I was talking about the seating chart for the wedding. We can't put my mother next to your Aunt Carol, not after the incident at the engagement party." "Fine, whatever you want, Isabella," he said, waving his hand dismissively as he checked his phone for the 10th time that hour. The call from Sal came 2 days later. Richard was sitting by the infinity pool, a cocktail sweating in his hand. "I have a name for you, Richard," Sal said, his voice grim. "But you're not going to like it." "Just tell me," Richard snapped. "The jet is registered to a shell corporation, but the beneficial owner is a man named Julian Croft." The name meant nothing to Richard. Julian Croft. Who the hell is Julian Croft? He's the founder and CEO of a company called Helios AI. They're a global tech firm. Data security, artificial intelligence, government contracts. He's very, very private. Almost a ghost. No social media, very few public photos. But he's significant. Significant. What does that mean? How much is he worth? This was the metric Richard understood. This was the language of his world. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Richard, this guy isn't in your league. He's not even playing the same sport. We're talking about a net worth estimated to be north of $30 billion. With a B. The cocktail glass slipped from Richard's hand and shattered on the stone patio. $30 billion. The number was so vast, it was almost incomprehensible. It was a figure that turned his own $250 million net worth into pocket change. It was the kind of wealth that didn't just buy jets. It bought influence, power, silence. It was the kind of wealth that could make a man like Richard Sterling disappear without a trace. "Are you sure?" Richard whispered, his throat suddenly dry. "I'm sure," Sal said, "and there's more. I looked into Croft's recent activities. He's a major philanthropist, but he does it all anonymously. A few months ago, one of his foundations made a significant acquisition in the world of rare books and manuscripts." A cold dread washed over Richard. What? What acquisition? He bought the entire archives of the Hogarth Press, the publishing house founded by Virginia and Leonard Woolf. The entire collection. Letters, manuscripts, first editions, everything. It was a private sale, very quiet. The seller was a small, struggling university press in England. Richard sank into a lounge chair, his head spinning. The letters. The Virginia Woolf letters he had bought at Sotheby's to humiliate Catherine. They were a drop in the ocean compared to what this man, this Julian Croft, had given her. Richard had bought her a page. Croft had bought her the entire library. The dusty old papers Richard had mocked were now the foundation of a collection curated by one of the world's richest men. Catherine hadn't lost at the auction. She had just been letting him win a meaningless skirmish while she was on her way to claiming an empire. He looked at Isabella, who was taking selfies by the pool, pouting her lips at her phone's camera. He looked at the diamond on her finger, the ring he had been so proud of. It suddenly looked cheap garish, a desperate plea for attention. His world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of perceived superiority, was beginning to crack. And in those cracks, a terrifying, new reality was taking root. Catherine Hayes, his mousy, unassuming ex-wife, was now involved with a man who could buy and sell him 100 times over without even noticing. The unraveling of Richard Sterling had begun. The annual Conservation Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was the glittering apex of the New York social season. It was a night where fortunes were pledged, reputations were polished, and the city's intricate power dynamics were on full public display. For Richard Sterling, it had always been a home game, a night to reinforce his status at the center of this universe. This year, however, the universe seemed to have tilted on its axis. He and Isabella arrived in a flurry of camera flashes, Isabella in a Scarlett O'Hara-esque crimson gown that was designed to make an entrance. Richard, in a classic Tom Ford tuxedo, played his part, smiling for the cameras, his hand firmly planted on the small of Isabella's back. But his eyes were scanning the crowd, searching for a ghost. He didn't have to search for long. He saw her across the great hall, standing near the entrance to the Temple of Dendur. It was Catherine, and she was breathtaking. She was wearing a simple column-like gown of deep sapphire silk that shimmered under the lights. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated chignon, and her only jewelry was a pair of delicate diamond and sapphire earrings. She was talking to a small group of people, and as she laughed at something one of them said, the sound seemed to carry across the cavernous space a note of pure, unadulterated joy. Beside her, his hand resting lightly on her arm, was Julian Croft. In person, he was even more imposing than Richard had imagined. He radiated a quiet intensity, a stillness that was more powerful than Richard's practiced bravado. He wasn't looking around the room, seeking approval or attention. His focus was entirely on Catherine. The whispers started almost immediately. "Is that Catherine Hayes? Who is she with? I've never seen him before." "That's Julian Croft, the Helios AI guy." "No, it can't be. He never comes to these things." "Well, he's here now, and he can't take his eyes off her." Richard watched as a procession of people he had considered his allies, his friends, made their way towards Catherine and Julian. People who had dropped Catherine from their guest lists the moment the divorce was announced. People who had sided with him, who had listened to his version of the story. Now, they were fawning over her, their smiles wide, their laughter a little too loud. He saw Jonathan and Beatrice Vance, a couple he had known for 20 years, practically elbow their way through the crowd to greet Catherine with effusive air kisses. Beatrice had once told Isabella that Catherine was a lovely girl, but a bit of a bore. Now she was hanging on Catherine's every word. The ultimate humiliation came when Richard and Isabella approached the main receiving line for the museum's director, Daniel Weiss. They were standing behind the Vances, who were now chatting animatedly with Catherine and Julian. As the line moved forward, Daniel Weiss greeted the Vances, then his eyes lit up as he saw the couple behind them. "Julian, I can't believe you made it," Weiss said, bypassing Richard completely to shake Julian's hand warmly. "And Catherine, you look absolutely stunning. We were so thrilled when we heard about the endowment for the new manuscript wing. It's a game changer for us." Richard froze. The manuscript wing, he shot a look at Catherine. She met his gaze, her expression calm, unreadable. There was no triumph in her eyes, no "I told you so." There was just a quiet confidence that was more unnerving than any overt display of victory. "Richard, Isabella, so good to see you." Weiss said, finally turning to them, his tone polite but noticeably cooler. The moment was fleeting, but in the shark-infested waters of Manhattan society, it was a mortal wound. They had been snubbed. Publicly, Isabella was seething. What was that all about, she hissed as they moved away from the receiving line. A manuscript wing? Is that where her new boyfriend is parking his money? How utterly dull. But Richard knew it wasn't dull. It was strategic. It was a display of power that was both subtle and absolute. He wasn't just buying her jets. He was building her legacies. He was immortalizing her passion in the stone and glass of the world's most famous museum. What could Richard's diamond ring compete with that, throughout the dinner, the humiliation continued? Their table, usually a prime spot near the stage, was in a less desirable location closer to the kitchens. From across the room, Richard could see Catherine and Julian seated at the director's table, flanked by senators, artists, and titans of industry. He watched as Julian leaned over and whispered something in Catherine's ear, making her laugh. The intimacy of the gesture was a knife in Richard's gut. He was losing. He was losing a game he hadn't even known he was playing. His wealth, his status, his beautiful fiancée, the pillars of his identity, were proving to be a house of cards in the face of Catherine's new reality. He had thought he had erased her, but instead she had been reborn stronger, more radiant, and powered by a force he could not comprehend or compete with. The whispers at the Met were a death knell for the world he had known. The ghost of his past was now the queen of the ball, and he was just a spectator in the cheap seats watching her coronation. The days following the Met Gala were a slow-motion nightmare for Richard Sterling. His world, once a glittering fortress of his own making, was being dismantled brick by brick. The story of his public snubbing had become a cautionary anecdote whispered over cocktails at the Bemelman's bar and dissected at lunches at La Goulou. Business associates who once clamored for his time now had secretaries who informed him they were in meetings indefinitely. He was a ghost in his own life, haunting the edges of a world that no longer wanted him. His relationship with Isabella crumbled under the pressure. Her affection had been transactional, a currency exchanged for the status he provided. With his social capital plummeting, she had become openly contemptuous. The wedding planning devolved into a theater of cruelty. "Are you sure you can still afford the custom-built ice sculpture of two swans kissing?" she asked one evening, her voice dripping with venom as she browsed a bridal magazine. They were in their cavernous Fifth Avenue apartment, which suddenly felt less like a palace and more like a gilded cage. "Perhaps we should scale back. We don't want to look desperate. It's so unbecoming." The final fatal blow came 2 weeks after the gala. Richard was banking on a merger with a rival firm, a deal that would have been a lifeline, a public declaration that he was still a player. The CEO, a man named Marcus Thorne, with whom he'd shared cigars and golfed for years, called him personally. "Rich, bad news," Marcus said, his voice strained with false sympathy. "The board's got cold feet, unforeseen market volatility." But Richard heard the truth in the silence between the words. Marcus's wife, a formidable woman who chaired 2 museum boards, had been at Daniel Weiss's table at the Met. She had witnessed his humiliation firsthand. It wasn't market volatility, it was social contagion. He was toxic. A black venomous rage began to boil in his gut. It was a potent cocktail of wounded pride, consuming jealousy, and a bizarre, twisted sense of ownership over the woman at the center of it all. Catherine. It was all her fault. He became obsessed. He had his PI Sal send him daily reports on her movements on Julian Croft. He learned that Croft had not only bought her the Hogarth Press archives, but had also established a fellowship in her name at Columbia University for the study of modernist literature. Each new detail was another twist of the knife. Driven by this corrosive fury, he did something he knew was reckless. He found out where she was living. It wasn't hard. The entire city was buzzing about the triplex penthouse Julian Croft had recently purchased at 220 Central Park South, the so-called billionaire's bunker. He went there on a Tuesday afternoon, a man on a mission of self-destruction. In the taxi ride downtown, he rehearsed his speech, a tirade of accusations and blame. When he arrived, he strode into the limestone-clad lobby, a place of hushed, intimidating wealth. The doorman, a man he would have once tipped $100 without a thought, regarded him with cool indifference. "I'm here to see Catherine Hayes," Richard announced, his voice a little too loud. "Is she expecting you, sir?" the doorman asked, not moving. "We're old friends." Richard bluffed the words, tasting like acid. He flashed a Patek Philippe watch like a badge of honor, but the doorman was unimpressed. Richard's name, it seemed, was no longer a key that opened all doors. He was forced to use a connection, calling a friend on the building's board to be allowed up. The humiliation of it stoked his rage even further. He rode the private elevator, its walls lined in brushed bronze, his heart pounding a frantic, angry rhythm. The ascent was silent smooth and felt like a journey to his own execution. When the doors opened directly into the apartment's foyer, he was momentarily stunned into silence. The space wasn't just large. It was a testament to a level of taste and wealth he'd only ever pretended to have. The marble floors were a seamless expanse of white, veined with subtle gray. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed Central Park like a living masterpiece. The art on the walls was quiet but significant, a small, pensive Rothko, a delicate Twombly. There was no gold, no glitz, none of the gaudy, look-at-me decor he favored. It was the home of someone who didn't need to shout about their money. And there, standing in a pool of afternoon sun, was Catherine. She was arranging a simple bouquet of white tulips in a vase, and she didn't look surprised to see him. She just looked weary. "Richard," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "you shouldn't be here. I needed to talk to you, Tick," he snarled, striding into the room. "What is this, Catherine? What are you doing?" "I'm arranging flowers," she replied, her preternatural calmness infuriating him. "Don't play dumb with me," he exploded, his voice cracking. "This," he gestured wildly, his arm encompassing the whole panoramic view. "The jet, the gala, this palace in the sky. Who are you? You are my wife. You were a librarian's daughter from Ohio. I found you. I made you. You were perfectly happy with a book and a cup of tea." "I'm still that person, Richard," she said quietly, placing a final tulip in the vase. "You just never bothered to look closely enough to see the rest of me. You saw a reflection of yourself, and you were angry when I didn't match the image you'd created." "And him," Richard spat the word out. "This Julian Croft, you leave me, and you immediately find one of the richest men in the world. Is that what this was all about? Were you planning this all along? Playing the mousy little bookworm while you waited for a bigger fish?" Catherine finally put down her garden shears and turned to face him fully. Her eyes, which he had once thought of as merely pretty, were now blazing with a cold fire he had never seen before. "No, Richard. That's your playbook, not mine. You're the one who equates a person's worth with their bank balance. I fell in love with a man who listened to me, who respected me, who saw me as an equal. His wealth is incidental. It's his character that I love." "Character?" Richard laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You think he has character, men? Like that don't get to where they are by being nice guys. They're sharks, Catherine, just like me. You're wrong, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was more chilling than a shout. He's nothing like you. She took a step closer, and for the first time, Richard felt a flicker of actual fear. And speaking of character, I think it's time we had an honest talk about yours. She walked over to a sleek minimalist desk and picked up a slim, leather-bound folder. Julian's people, as you would call them, are very thorough. When he fell in love with me, he became concerned about you. Not as a rival, but as a threat. So they did a little digging into our marriage, into our finances. She opened the folder. Do you remember the Sterling Opportunities Fund, the private investment fund you started during our last year together? The one you told me was too complicated for me to understand. Richard's blood ran cold. That's none of your business. It became my business when you forged my signature on the incorporation documents, making me a liable partner without my knowledge, Catherine said, her voice like ice. It became my business when you used it as a shell to illegally hide marital assets from our divorce settlement. And it became my business, Richard, when you used it to commit insider trading based on confidential information you wheedled out of my father's oldest friend at the SEC, a dear man you knew I trusted implicitly. She slid a document across the polished surface of the desk. It was a copy of a wire transfer from the Sterling Opportunities Fund to an offshore account dated 2 days before a major corporate acquisition was announced. A transaction Richard had thought was buried under layers of corporate deceit. This is a copy, she said, her voice steady and clear. The originals, along with a sworn affidavit from your former accountant, a man you fired without severance last year who was more than happy to talk, are with the SEC. They are very interested in your complicated fund. The merger you were so excited about, it didn't fall through because of market volatility. It fell through because Marcus Thorne was given a friendly, anonymous warning that he was about to merge with a man under active federal investigation. Richard stared at the paper, his world collapsing in on itself. The bravado, the anger, the jealousy, it all drained away, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. He had been so focused on Catherine's new life, on the man she was with, that he had never considered that they might be looking back at him with a high-powered telescope. He had seen her as a ghost to be haunted, not a force to be reckoned with. Why? He whispered, his voice cracking the sound, pathetic even to his own ears. Why are you doing this? Catherine looked at him not with hatred, but with a kind of profound, sad finality. You could have just let me go, Richard. You could have taken your petty victory at the auction and your new life and just walked away. But you couldn't. Your ego wouldn't allow it. You had to try and crush me one last time. You had to prove you were the winner. Well, congratulations. You've won. You've won an SEC investigation, the end of your engagement, and the complete and utter destruction of the reputation you worked so hard to build. She walked past him towards the window, overlooking the park, turning her back on him for the last time. The doorman will show you out. Goodbye, Richard. He stood there for a long moment, a statue in the ruins of his own life, before turning and walking towards the elevator, a defeated man, finally truly understanding the meaning of the word loss. He had not just lost his wife, he had lost himself in the process. The confrontation was over, and there was no doubt who had emerged the victor. The Mediterranean sun was a warm liquid gold blanket on Catherine's skin. She was lying on a plush lounger On the deck of the Ataraxia, Julian's magnificent 200-foot sailing yacht, as it cut a silent, graceful path through the turquoise waters of the Aegean Sea. The name, she had learned, was the Greek philosophical term for a state of serene calmness, of being undisturbed by life's chaos. It was a perfect description of her life now. It had been 6 months since the confrontation in the penthouse, 6 months since Richard had walked out of her life and into the ruins of his own. The fallout had been swift and brutal, a public spectacle that Catherine had watched from a quiet distance. The SEC investigation had become front-page news, with the Wall Street Journal running a series of articles detailing the Sterling Opportunities Fund scandal. They painted a damning portrait of a man consumed by greed and arrogance. Isabella, in a move of breathtakingly predictable self-preservation, had fled the sinking ship. Her publicist issued a statement, dripping with faux sincerity, announcing the end of the engagement due to irreconcilable differences in personal ethics. The statement went on to detail Isabella's newfound commitment to philanthropic causes that support transparency and female empowerment. The last Catherine had heard Isabella was being photographed on the arm of a minor European royal with a storied title and notoriously empty pockets. She had traded one form of currency for another. Richard, stripped of his company, his fiancée, and his reputation, had been forced to sell his assets at fire sale prices to cover his legal fees and fines. The Bombardier jet, the Rolls-Royce, the Fifth Avenue apartment, all were gone, liquidated to pay for his hubris. He had retreated from public life, a disgraced footnote in the annals of New York society. Catherine felt no joy in his downfall, only a quiet, sad sense of inevitability. He had built his life on a foundation of sand, and it had been washed away by a tide of his own making. Julian emerged from the cabin, a tray in his hands, bearing 2 glasses of chilled white wine and a small plate of figs and cheese. He sat down beside her, his presence a comforting warmth that had become the anchor of her world. "A message came through for you on the satellite comms," he said, handing her a glass. "From David Abernathy at Sotheby's." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I thought I was off his list of high-value clients." Julian's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Apparently you're back on it. It seems a certain collection of Virginia Woolf's letters to Vita Sackville West are back on the market. The previous owner defaulted on his payment." He let the statement hang in the warm air. "Abernathy was wondering if you were still interested. He said he could secure them for you privately before they go to auction again." Catherine stared out at the endless blue horizon. She thought about the letters, about the desperate hunger she had felt for them. She thought about the woman she had been in that auction room, feeling small and powerless, seeing those pages as a lifeline to a world of substance she felt denied. She thought about the sting of Richard's casual cruelty, and she realized with a sudden, startling clarity that the hunger was gone. "No," she said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. "Tell him thank you, but I'm not interested." Her passion for those letters had been a symptom of a deeper need, a need to connect with a life of the mind, a life of meaning that had been starved in her marriage. Now, she was living that life every day. She and Julian spent their evenings reading to each other, debating philosophy, and planning the curriculum for the new literary foundation they had endowed. The letters were a symbol of a craving that had now been satisfied. "I have the real thing now," she said, turning to him, her eyes shining. She leaned over and kissed him, a slow, deep kiss, filled with gratitude and a peace she had once thought unattainable. "I don't need to buy someone else's love letters." Julian smiled, a deep, contented smile that reached his eyes. I'm glad to hear that. He gestured towards a small, leather-bound book on the table beside them, an object she hadn't noticed before. Because I have something for you. Catherine picked it up. The leather was soft and worn, a deep navy blue. There was no title on the cover, only a small embossed C in the bottom corner. She opened it. Inside, on the first page, in elegant, familiar handwriting, were the words, "The collected thoughts of Julian Croft, on first meeting Catherine Hayes and thereafter." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise and overwhelming emotion. "You wrote this?" "I started it the day we met in that bookstore," he said, a faint, endearing blush on his cheeks. "I jot down things after our conversations. It's a bit rambling, I'm afraid, and my penmanship is terrible, but it's all true." Her fingers, trembling slightly, turned the pages. It was filled with observations about her quotes from books they had discussed, half-formed poems and heartfelt declarations of his growing love. One entry, dated a week after they met, read, "She speaks of books not as objects, but as old friends. Her passion isn't for the value of a first edition, but for the soul of the story within. She is the rarest thing I have ever encountered, a person who is entirely authentically herself. It was more intimate, more precious than any collection of famous letters could ever be. It was their history, their story written not for the world, but just for her. It was proof that she had been seen, truly seen, from the very beginning." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the ink on the page. But they were not the tears of sadness or humiliation she had once known so well. They were tears of pure, cleansing joy. The ghost of her past was finally completely gone. The auction, the ring, the drama, it all felt like it had happened to someone else in another lifetime. She closed the book and held it to her chest as if it were the most valuable thing in the world, and to her, it was. She looked out at the endless expanse of the sea, at the horizon, where the blue of the water met the blue of the sky. It was a vista of infinite possibility. She had her own letters now, her own story, her own quiet, unshakable love. This was her new beginning, and it was more beautiful than anything she could have ever dared to imagine. In the end, this wasn't a story about the triumph of wealth over wealth. It was a story about the triumph of substance over flash, of character over reputation. Catherine Hayes didn't need a billionaire to save her. She needed to save herself, to remember the woman she was before the world told her who she should be. Julian Croft wasn't her rescuer. He was the partner she deserved, a man who valued her mind more than her appearance, her passion more than her pedigree. Richard Sterling's empire crumbled because it was built on ego and illusion. Catherine's new life is flourishing because it's built on the bedrock of authenticity, respect, and a love that is as deep and as real as the sea. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate revenge? Let us know in the comments below. If you love stories of dramatic twists